Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the October 11th, 2021 Merriam City Council meeting. I'd like to start our meeting tonight by asking you to please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Sissom.
Here.
Councilmember DeBold.
Here.
Councilmember Hands.
Here.
Councilmember Caldwell.
Here.
Councilmember Naff. Councilmember Neal.
Here by phone.
Councilmember Pape.
Here.
Councilmember Silvers.
Here.
Councilmember Yodrich.
Here.
Very good. Thank you. We'll move to public items. During this segment of our meeting this evening, members of the public are encouraged to use this time to make comments about matters that do not appear on the agenda. Comments about items on the regular agenda will be taken up as each item is considered, and there is a 5-minute limit on public comments. Also, as a reminder, in accordance with the governing body rules and procedures, the city reserves the right to refuse public comments that are personal, impertinent, or slanderous. We have a sign-up sheet outside for anyone who might be interested in making public comments this evening. If you didn't get a chance to see that and still wish to make a comment, now would be a time to come forward. Thank you. Have no one signed up this evening. Okay, I'll go ahead and close out public items, and we'll move to our consent agenda. All items that are listed under the heading are considered to be routine by the City Council and may be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a council member so requests, in which case that item is removed from the consent agenda and considered separately. We have 2 items this evening. Does any member of the council wish to remove either of the 2 items for separate consideration? Okay, then I'll accept a motion and a second. Bob Pape?
Mayor, I'd move the council approve consent agenda items 1 and 2.
And a second, Whitney?
I second that.
Motion made and second. Madam Clerk?
Councilmember DeBold.
Aye.
Councilmember Hands.
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell.
Aye.
Councilmember Neal.
Aye.
Councilmember Pape.
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers.
Aye.
Councilmember Yodrich.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Very good. Next area of our agenda is the mayor's report. I'm going to come down forward where we're going to give out 2 of our employee service awards. Come down there.
So as everybody will recall, it's been to our meetings for several years. We used to do all of these at one time. We would have all of our service awards, which are awards for our 5, 10, 15, so multiple of 5. We started several years ago splitting those up into the quarters so that we could actually have a smaller group of people each quarter and give them their due respect and congratulations to the efforts they put on. So the awards that we're giving out tonight are for our 3rd quarter service awards, and we have 2 folks that we're celebrating this evening for their dedication. First one with 15 years of dedicated service to our Park and Rec Department is Lisa Naughton.
You want one without your name?
And our second certificate of service for 25 dedicated years of service from our Public Works Department is Mark Bowser.
Hey, thanks for being here tonight. Who's this creepy guy? Thank you all for being here this evening. And thank you all for acknowledging the fine work that these people do. Next, I got a couple of proclamations to read. The first one deals with Indigenous Peoples Day. So please bear with me as I get the honor to read this proclamation. It begins, whereas Indigenous Peoples Day was first proposed in 1977 by a delegation of Native nations to the International Conference on Discrimination Against Indigenous Populations in the Americas, and whereas the United States endorsed the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People on December 16, 2010. And whereas a growing number of cities, towns in the United States have recognized the second Monday of October as Indigenous Peoples Day, reimagining Columbus Day as an opportunity to celebrate Indigenous heritage and resiliency. And whereas the City of Merriam recognizes the historic, cultural, and contemporary significance of Indigenous peoples of the lands that are also become known as the Americas. And whereas the City of Merriam recognizes it was founded and built upon lands first inhabited by Indigenous people of this region, and acknowledges and honors these people, these members of the community. And whereas the City of Merriam values the many contributions made to our community through Indigenous people, knowledge, labor, technology, science, philosophy, arts, and the deep cultural contributions that have shaped the character of the city. Now, therefore, I, Ken Sissom, on behalf of the Merriam City Council, do hereby proclaim October 11, 2021 as Indigenous Peoples Day. Catch my breath here a second. Second proclamation. Whereas on November 8th, 1960, the voters of Kansas approved a constitutional amendment granting cities home rule authority. The Home Rule Amendment took effect in Kansas on July 1st, 1961. Home Rule gives local government, specifically cities, the power to make decisions at the local level based on the unique needs and values of their residents. And whereas cities across our great state manage differing opinions and views on issues ranging from zoning to funding for local services and programs, Home Rule keeps control of the community in the hands of local residents. And whereas the Home Rule Amendment empowers cities to determine local affairs and government actions, including the levying of taxes, fees, charges, and other exaction. And whereas the City of Merriam and the League of Kansas Municipalities, cities continually work to educate and engage municipal officers or officials, the legislature, and the general public about the importance of home rule and local decision-making. And whereas the 60th anniversary of the passage of the constitutional home rule is a fitting time for all municipalities to engage their residents to learn about the Kansas Constitution and local laws so that all Kansans may continue to receive the many benefits of home rule. Now, therefore, I, Ken Sissom, by virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of the City of Merriam, do hereby proclaim October 11th, 2021 as Home Rule Day in the City of Merriam. I know you're all applauding because I'm done with that proclamation. I appreciate that. I'm applauding that myself. Both very, very important issues. Joking aside, we certainly depend on home rule. And again, you can't go anywhere. In fact, we have Indian missions all around this area, so this Indigenous Peoples Day certainly hits very close to home. So let's move on into council items. The very first item is polling software presentation. And we have a special presentation this evening about that, so.
It's doing the computer login.
Well, we're getting this all together just as a reminder, and Jenna, I'm sure will do a great job covering the items that she's here to present tonight. This was from our city council goals and objectives, which was to investigate polling software. There's been conversation over the last 18 months or so from various council members to take a look at polling softwares and ways that we might be able to enhance communications between our residents and the city council, city staff, so on. So we've tasked Jenna as our communications manager to dig into some of those softwares, and she's here to make that presentation tonight. So it looks like she's ready to go.
Thanks, Chris. Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. All right. So why are we looking at this today? Kind of how Chris said, City Council objective is to investigate the use of survey tools to seek feedback from residents on large community issues. And so tonight I'm going to share the research overview that I've done. We're going to talk about polling versus surveys, the 5 survey products that we did look into, and then of course this is not all inclusive. And then after this presentation, I want to make sure you still find value in survey options. Let us know if any or a couple of these options you'd like us to continue to do a deeper dive in, and then guidance for next steps. So for surveys, they're designed to help determine future actions, especially on complex issues. They're usually long and made up of multiple questions, can ask for more personal information such as age and location, requires more of a commitment from respondent because they're typically longer, requires more time to gather responses, and analysis occurs to formulate a comprehensive conclusion. Polls are usually to gather on a single topic. They're usually focused on the immediate, so we usually use them at forums or meetings. They're usually one multiple choice question. They're usually anonymous, and you get that instant feedback. So when are surveys the best method, and when are polling the best method? So for surveys, you need comprehensive feedback. You have lots of questions to ask, to gather personal details, and to ask open-ended questions. And polls are the best method when you need immediate feedback, one question to ask. You don't need detailed responses and no time for analysis. So an example for polls to be best used would be as if we had a public hearing or an open forum. And then surveys would be if we wanted to get a satisfaction survey on an MCC class at the end of the class. So because you guys had talked about you really want something with community engagement, we felt surveys were the best option. So we looked into 5 survey options. They were FlashVote, POCO, Bang the Table, Google Forms, and SurveyMonkey. All options allow for images and video to be embedded in the surveys, and most allow for multilingual or Spanish, but for an extra cost. There's a couple in there that do have free gadgets that we could use for Spanish. So the first one is FlashVote. FlashVote is the only one that we looked at that was statistically valid. And what I mean by that is it's not agenda-driven, so it's almost like doing mini ETC surveys throughout the year. You will need 260, about 600 residents to get that plus 4 to 6%. 100 residents would get you that 10%. And you use the same residents for all the surveys. And you have to opt in before a survey takes place to make sure it stays that statistically valid. You get the results in 48 hours, so people have 2 days to get their answers submitted. And we're responsible for the outreach unless we want to pay for an extra fee. And that's typically 60 cents for a postcard or 20 cents for SMS text messaging, which they said we have about 5,000, so it'll be an extra $1,000 for that. Let's see. There's 6 surveys per year and up to 5 questions for each survey. The last question is open-ended. And they work with city staff to produce unbiased questions. So Arkansas and Kirkwood, Missouri are the cities in the area that use FlashVote right now, but they are in 20-plus cities.
I think Mr. Pape has a question.
Yes.
Would you rather us hold questions to the very end or as we go through each one?
It's up to you. Either is fine.
Why don't we ask him as we go on, because you might forget, and if you're going to get in the weeds on some of these, it might be answered later on, but is this as it relates to this particular one?
Yes.
Go right ahead. Your mic on?
You turn on your microphone?
Yeah, my question is.
You turned it off, yeah.
Oh,
There you go.
I guess it was on. Sorry, thank you. My question is that it says on there $5,900 a year is obviously, I guess, a once-a-year fee. But $1,500 setup fee, is that $1,500 for each question? Like if we go out 5 times a year, is it $1,500 each time? Or is $1,500 gets us 5 or 6?
It's,
Different
the
questions to
1,500 is
ask.
the one-time setup fee, but it doesn't include that initial outreach. That's an additional fee.
Okay, but the $1,500 setup fee isn't every time we send out a survey, is it?
No, no.
It's, okay, that was my question. I didn't know if that
All
was
right.
additional. 1,500 every time we went out and polled them or surveyed them, if that was, 5 times, and then it was additional 1,500 5 different times for that.
It's just once. You just pay for it once and then you don't pay for it again.
Okay, thank you.
And then I'd like to verify something too.
Yes.
So you said we choose the respondents, and then we hold those same respondents for the whole year?
Correct.
Do we make them swear they won't move? I mean,
No, it's
that
just your
seems-
initial. People can opt in, and not answer. They say they typically have 50 to 70% response rate, so they just wouldn't be
Oh,
in
I
that
see.
response rate.
Okay.
Yeah,
So there's a pool, and then we have a respondents out of the pool.
correct.
Okay. All
So
right.
the first thing we'd have to do is find a statistically significant number of people that are willing to do.
Correct. And they said between 260 and 600 would be that plus minus 4% for us.
Okay.
And if we only get 100, it's still plus minus 10%. But
Okay.
we can add on to it. The goal is just, you want to get that pool before we put out that survey so they don't have that interest in that, that special interest in that topic.
Well, and then only a percentage of those will actually do the survey, so
Correct.
it starts to get smaller each time. Yeah.
It does. And hopefully, though, it grows as you keep, people learn about flash vote, the more people will want to opt in.
And if I can add on to that really quick, the benefit of that is, of course, that if you say we're going to do a survey about chickens, for example, then you're going to get all the people who are interested in chickens. And so you're going to get a biased response. Whereas the beauty of this is that it's not specific to any topic. So as Jenna said, you can have people who sign up after a vote or after a survey goes out. And then, they're just kind of locked in and will be asked in the future on all of these other surveys.
But there's nothing about validating that they are still part of the city? I
Oh,
mean,
so in flash vote, you have to register. You have to register your name, where you live,
Okay.
everything like that. So that's what flash vote, you're able to do it by word and things like that. You are able to do that. I think what you're talking about is you have the pool of people at the beginning. And they can answer the survey or they can't. But if they say, hey, this is about chickens, I know my neighbor is really interested about chickens, I'm going to send them that survey. They are not part of that statistically significant survey. They separate them.
Oh, okay. Well, I actually am more concerned about people who decide to move and they still are going to get the emails and they're going to still participate.
I can ask to see how they do that with when people leave outside of the city.
Okay.
And
thanks.
it's just going to be, they say.
Mr.
their
Caldwell, would you
address.
turn on your mic, please?
Oh,
There you go. There, thank you.
There won't be any verification of valid I mean, we'll get addresses and we'll say, well, that's a Merriam address. But we still won't know that person really lives there.
I don't know.
Correct.
You could just grab a Merriam address and be part of this.
Jenna, do they check with voter registrations? Is that this one?
That's the next one.
Oh, my bad.
Well, let's go through a couple more and see if it kind of makes more sense. Whitney, do you have a question?
I have one verification question, and I'm not trying to be like a grammarian. If that's a word, that would be a hilarious word to get wrong. On the agenda packet, it says that they do initial outreach through postcards, but if you go back one slide,
So Yes, there are a few changes from what you guys received on
No problem.
Thursday compared to what I have up here, but this is the most accurate. I did talk to a few vendors over the weekend just to kind of verify a few things.
Oh, thanks for working on it. All right, cool, no problem.
Carry on.
Thanks for reminding me. So some of the questions that you can see on the right side, or let's say you want to say if you had $100 to allocate, where would you put it? And people can say, hey, I'd put 40 here, 20 here, 20 here. And then you can see how they have the yes, no, open-ended type questions. All right, so POCO is very similar to flash vote, but it's not statistically valid. People opt in once the survey is live, and the same thing, we're responsible for outreach, or they can do for an additional fee. Now, POCO confirms opt-in for those who do through voter registration, and they say they get an 80% voter registration verification rate. And while it does have demographic breakdowns, any detailed analysis report, like weighing data, does cost more per survey. So they can detect duplicate responses and limit the number of person can complete a survey per IP address, just like flash vote. And then they do have, for Spanish, they recommend we do Google Translate, which they do offer for free, or they charge $2,800 per survey if we want them to do the Spanish part. So the good thing about POCO is they do have a content library, and we can change it for our specific questions. And because they don't have an unlimited number of surveys that we can do those quick polls if we did want to do like a yes/no question. They provide real-time feedback with demographics and geographic breakdown. Overland Park Planning Department and Wichita, Kansas are the cities and groups that use POCO in our area. And then the right, this graphic kind of shows you an example of a geographic map that they have. Yes.
Would this type of survey be equivalent to like what Confluence does when they ask us how we want to address like approaching the downtown corridor issue, where you can, not issue, but revitalization, where people can put, they don't have to register ahead of time. They can hop in anytime and give opinions.
Yeah, so they, and I'm not too familiar with Confluence. I do know they're like the consulting group, but this one does do where you can opt in, or you can just be anonymous and give your answer, your responses. You're welcome. Bruce, Councilman.
So you made the comment this would, based on IP addresses?
Voter registration.
Voter registration, okay. And one vote or one survey per IP address?
Yes,
Per voter registration, we get all that?
yes.
Okay. Like, our household has 4 or 5 IP addresses, so.
You could, from each IP address, give a response.
Okay.
Yeah, could you explain, I mean, it says it's not statistically valid, and you kind of went over that with the last one, of why it was. Why can't this one become statistically valid if we know the IP address and?
Because people still can they don't have to opt in to respond to our surveys. So Flash Vote, you have to register everything to take a survey, where with this one, you don't have to say where you live and do the demographics with that.
So for example, what I think Jennifer mentioned before, that if we were going to ask a question, let's just say about sidewalks, you might get 90% of the people that say they want to answer that question know it's about sidewalks. They're against sidewalks, so you're going to have skew. It's not statistically valid. It's statistically valid for those 90 people, but you can't extrapolate anything about the larger community because they already know the nature of the question. The other one, they have to say, I'll answer the question without knowing the question, so you take the bias out of it.
Okay, makes sense, thank you.
This is Dave Neal. I have a question as well.
Go ahead, David.
Okay, between the two, POCO and the first one, and the question is statistically valid, basically, aren't you, by getting essentially a panel in advance that's agreed to participate on a periodic basis, also pre-selecting a certain group of individuals? So in other words, you're biased against people who are more engaged in city affairs affairs, then whereas the POLCO one, true, it lets people who have an opinion about something affirmatively engage in the dialogue. But as you point out, it doesn't allow for us to reach those who don't really care or have a different opinion as easily. It seems to me those are both trade-offs. They're not one is particularly better than the other. But is that am I kind of understanding the difference?
It sounds like it. So the next one is Bing the Table, and I put community engagement on top instead of survey, because to me, if you're looking really for community engagement, this is it. We create a public engagement website with our own branding, and then each project has its own web page. It can do everything. It can do surveys, polls, comment sections, like little Post-it notes. Again, it's not statistically valid, though. You can do text, sentiment, and cloud analysis, though. They do have those options. The demographics and geographics would need to be asked collected with each survey, or again, you do have that opt-in option, just like POLCO. It's a little bit more pricey, as you can see, because we have our own website and then web pages per project. If people opt in to register, they can do demographics, geographics, and ability to limit one submission per user per IP address. Again, that is if only they opt in. And this is what the web page would look like. It would have the information about your project, who's listening to your comments on the project, a project timeline, these little Post-it notes you can see where people can leave their own comments specifically. It has a Google Translate widget embedded for free, so it translates all text on the webpage into Spanish. Manhattan, Kansas, Kansas City, Kansas, KCMO Planning Department, and several cities near St. Louis and school districts use this. So if you're looking for the all-encompass engagement process, this would be it. Again, though, it would not be statistically significant.
Brittany?
Who would be in charge of managing that whole other website for that whole other project?
Very good question.
Thank you.
So Google.
Was that a rhetorical question, by the way?
It wasn't, but I got the answer.
Okay, just want to make sure.
So Google Forms, this is the only free survey option with no limit of number of questions or number of responses when we put out a survey. They're easy to create, they have question logic. The demographics, geographics would need to be asked and collected with each survey. The photo heading can be custom made with our brand, but not our colors. It could do one of our colors, but not both the yellow and the blue. We have used multiple times for internal surveys, but we haven't obviously done this for any external surveys, except I think the community center might do some for classes at the end of the classes, so they have done that. The responses are in real time and downloaded into Google Sheets. You don't have to be a Google user to take the survey, but it is the one way to guarantee that you get that one response from the IP address. And this is kind of what a question would look like, and then an example of what it would look like on our end.
I have a question. This is Councilmember Neal.
Right ahead.
First of all, I think we used the Google Forms in some of the, like the 5701 committee, and so we've used it before. But my question actually is, what's to stop someone from who's not a Merriam resident from answering, or someone from answering, taking the survey multiple times if we use Google?
So a way to do this is if you ask them to put their address in or what ward they're in, but that would be the only way to get that geographic part of it in.
I have another response to that.
Go ahead.
You can also, this Councilmember Yardich, you can also set it so you can only have one response per email address. And I think you can still embed Google Forms, so if we wanted to take it off of that page, we could always put it, maybe if our website can do this, like just embed it in one of our site pages, so we have a little more control over location and branding and
Yes,
stuff like
and
that?
you can do that with our next one too, but I think it's the same thing for taking that website and then having that one IP address for that.
Okay.
Right. So SurveyMonkey is the paid version, or they have free versions and paid versions. With the paid version, it's how it's more robust than Google Forms in how it displays its data. You can choose how you want the data displayed, pie graph, things like that. Whereas with Google Forms, it has the display based on question type, so multiple choice, the yes/no answers. The free version only lets you do 10 question max and 40 responses. The paid version, the $2,700 per year, is the business one, and it allows for 15,000 responses per year. It has sentiment analysis, map data visualization, which is like heat map, multilingual, and then you get rid of that you get rid of that SurveyMonkey footer at the bottom of your survey. And then it's very similar to Google Forms. You ask your question, and then you have whatever layout that you would like it to be displayed in. So what are other cities doing? As you can see, most cities around neighboring cities are using SurveyMonkey, the paid version, but most of these cities that I talked to are only using them a couple times per year. And then the responses vary from 100 to 3,500 responses. You can see most cities, like I said, do use that SurveyMonkey and Google Forms. Now, Gardner recently used this survey for their fireworks ordinance and whether it should be updated, and they did receive 3,500 responses using the paid version of SurveyMonkey. Overland Park uses Google Forms, and they said they really love it. They use it internally and externally, and they use it with every department. They have used it for larger projects as well. They recently did it when they changed the Santa Fe Commons Park to Thompson Park, and they were able to show, hey, these are our 4 options of what we want the park to look like, and name change, and then people were able to vote using SurveyMonkey doing that, or Google Forms, sorry. Shawnee has the SurveyMonkey as well, but they really use it for internal purposes only. They say they use contractors similar to us for those larger projects. Like imagine Shawnee, what we used with our comp plan and with our 5701 plan, so they use those contractors to do those larger type surveys for us instead. So this gives you a great graph to show you similarities and differences and the pros and cons of everything we went over. This will hopefully explain a lot put together. Now, none can do specific neighborhoods per se. I know some of you would want to go into your neighborhood and ask specific questions for your neighbors. The best way to do that would be creating a survey and then sending it out via email. SurveyMonkey and Google Forms, you can do it where you get the email response so you know who's responding to get that one IP address back. But this would be a great option if you wanted to do those HOAs and things like that. Flash vote can separate by word, but not for, flash vote, again, is the only one that's statistically valid. So if you guys have any questions based on this graphic.
Whitney, go ahead.
On the multilingual translation for SurveyMonkey, is that something that they actually have a translator do, or is it just like a Google Translate type thing?
That would be something that I would look more into with that deeper dive.
Okay, because a lot of times if you're in Chrome, will already translate the page for you based on your language settings. So,
Yes.
okay.
I believe that's what
Yeah.
most of them do is they have that if they do translate it, but some of these do have that widget that turns it on and off, which is kind of nice.
Okay, cool.
Bob?
Do all of these different companies give you the ability to do it, I said comprehensive or semi-comprehensive, because you can't have it too long, but a paragraph of maybe kind of a preamble to what the question is versus just a sentence saying, do you want burning or not, not burning or something like that? I mean, can we kind of lead them into some of the complexities before they make that decision of how they want to vote?
You can. I do know Flash Vote specifically said it's easier to do those short sentences to get those responses, but like Google Forms and SurveyMonkey, you can, add pictures and documents and and that as well, to put that in the question for more context. You can also do links for a few of them, where it can hyperlink to like our website that could take it so they can learn more information as well.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
But they could answer the question without reading any of that, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Jason?
This is probably something that you haven't researched, but I'm just curious, when dealing with a company like this, who's responsible for security and security of the data of participants? Do we know if that data is being collected and saved and used, or is it, like one of these you said you could do it anonymously, so you probably don't have to enter much data, but I'm just curious if we would be opening anyone up to having their data collected when they don't necessarily want it and maybe prevent them from participating.
Yeah, that's a good question. I believe that would be more when I do a deeper dive to get more into that part, but I know they're reputable businesses like all the companies, and even SurveyMonkey, people know that name, and so I'm sure there's some security behind it, but I would definitely want to look more into that for you.
Anybody else have questions on this?
Okay.
I don't have questions, but I do have a suggestion.
Okay.
It seems to me that we might be in a really good place to go ahead and start with something free and get our feet wet, our fingers a little dirty from digging in the dirt, and see if we need something more robust. I, at one point, thought SurveyMonkey was probably the best answer, but now I'm hearing maybe Google Forms, so I don't know about that. But.
Yeah, and I did speak to Lauren, and she's very familiar with Google Forms and says it's quite easy to use and user-friendly to put the forms together. SurveyMonkey is easy as well. It just has a little bit more visual, pleasing look to it.
Right.
And a couple things behind the scenes that, the multilingual and things like that you wouldn't be able to do with Google Forms.
And then do any of the other ones that are more expensive, do they provide any of the statistical analysis?
Yes, I can show you Flash Vote. I do have that one pulled up. Oh, made it a little too big. It worked earlier. But if you can see, it says the total participants, and then how many of them are part of that original group compared to how many are extra. And then if you scroll down, this is the question they have is this. I took this from the Plymouth, Minnesota, just so you know, and they did a survey on whether they should have chickens and bees, consider having it in their backyard of residents' homes. And so they asked that question, and you can, the options were definitely, probably, maybe, probably no, definitely no, and not sure. And so they asked several questions with that. They have a word cloud analysis, and then all the responses, so you can read every response. You can also take that, they don't, because it's statistically valid, and they ask specific questions that they work with us, they say they don't need to do sentiment analysis, which is when you take specific words and then put them similar like a word cloud, but it's like the negative and the positive. And they say because of the way they ask the questions, they don't have to do it that way, but they do have the word cloud so you can see which word is used the most throughout all the responses that you have. And this one, they had 1,491 participants, and so you can imagine all the people that did respond to that.
So I have used Google Analytics, that's website activity. Does Google Forms have anything that dovetails like Google Analytics that might be helpful?
What we could do is embed the survey onto our webpage, and then we can do Google Analytics on our webpage.
There you go.
But you couldn't track engagement with the specific form if you embedded it, right? Like based on per question or anything. It would just be
Correct.
like page
Right.
views, unique users, new users, like that
Correct.
kind of thing, right?
Correct.
Could actually set up a page so it's very specific to one thing.
Well, yeah,
So-
but the individual form itself would be embedded, right? So completions on the form and the sheet
Sure.
would be
Correct.
completions, right? Okay.
I still stand by my suggestion, so.
Jason?
I had one more question I forgot to ask.
Yes.
When you showed Polko, the heat map, is that visible to the people that are taking the survey? And could that sway them?
Oh, that would be internal only.
That's just, okay,
Correct,
okay, thank you.
from what I understood.
Bob?
Yeah, I'm just curious as to, obviously, I guess you've talked to all these Gardner, Edgerton, Kearney, Lenexa, Liberty, why the majority of them are using the paid version of SurveyMonkey versus Google Forms or even the free version of SurveyMonkey.
That's a really good question. I think it has to do with the more robust of the Google Forms. You get the data visualization that you want. You get the multilingual. There's a lot of things that you can do with SurveyMonkey that you can't have with Google Forms.
That might be a reason why we would want to use that versus Google Forms, I would think,
And then-
especially if the multilingual.
And then when I spoke to Lenexa, they said that SurveyMonkeys and these type of surveys in general are more of like a gut check of what people think. So it's almost like you kind of know what they want, but they want to do these surveys because you want to make sure you're thinking what our residents are thinking. They do say similar to Shawnee for larger projects, similar to like our comp plan and 5701, they would use consultants to do those type of surveys for the larger projects.
Anybody else have any questions?
So, yeah, going forward, I guess it would be the guidance. Do you guys still want us to look into surveys with any of these projects, one or more? And if so, if you want to narrow down or at least eliminate one or two, and then we can do more of a deeper dive as well if needed. Or if you have any other questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Bob?
I do think it's important because we've always had an issue with people saying, well, I didn't know. And I think anytime we can engage the public in finding out what their thoughts are and what their wishes are, I think is good. I know that we'll be limited sometimes, and we wouldn't be doing this for obviously all questions, but I think we need to go forward with something. And looking this over, I'm kind of thinking that maybe we do the SurveyMonkey with the paid version, just because it's more robust, has bilingual uses. I don't know how the rest of the council feels, but I think I would lean toward that.
Whitney?
I'd just say if we did go with Google Forms, we would be totally reliant on browser translation, right? So either we would have to do the translating or we just hope someone's using Chrome.
Correct.
Okay. And then for SurveyMonkey, is the cost, like, are we tied into a multi-year kind of contract? Do you pay month to month?
They have yearly and month to month.
Okay.
With theirs. They do have like a personal, in your original one, there was a number of 385, and that's for the personal.
Yeah.
And when I looked more into it, business was probably the way to go because you have more than one user tied to it. So that's where you get the 2,700.
Sounds like a good start.
So would the council like us to report back?
Hold on, we got one question. Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, Councilmember Neal, I was, just sort of my feedback, I've been looking at this for quite a while as well, and I do not think that Google Forms is really a robust enough platform for what I'd like to see. The SurveyMonkey paid version possibly, and I also have looked at Polko quite a bit, and I think Polko offers a lot of nice features that allow us to kind of present some more rich information for people to look at when they are taking the survey. So those would be my two interests in going forward and looking forward. So either of those.
Okay?
So would it be fair to do a deeper dive on, it sounds like SurveyMonkey, Polko, and Google Forms?
And what would a deeper dive look like, just so we can make sure we meet the expectations of council?
You know, I wish I could answer that off the top of my head, but I can't. Almost like a recommendation, I guess, from narrowing all this down is what I would think. Does anyone else have?
That may be true, but it just seems to me if we go ahead and say, let's start low end with SurveyMonkey and get our feet wet, then we're going to be able to say, oh, that's not going to meet our needs, and so now it's time to change. It's not like, I don't think we're going to build a big library of things that we're going to reuse over and over again, so.
Mr. Caldo?
Do we have a topic that we would do a survey on?
I don't have a topic that we would do a survey on, no, sir.
That's why I said
If
it's
we
so
were to
important.
use one of these low-cost options and actually do a survey, we might learn a lot. So why don't we
I would
wait till we
agree.
get a topic and then use either SurveyMonkey or Google Forms and do a survey and see what happens?
We could do that.
Mr. Pape?
I have a topic, because I've been asked numerous times in the fire department itself about burning versus non-burning. I mean, I think people want to burn, but I don't know that for a fact. But that is something I would throw out as a potential topic that we might want to explore, because I'd like to know what the community thinks. I mean, personally.
I think that's a great example for a topic that we'd like more information about. However, I caution you, if you put the survey out to most people, I believe, this is my opinion, on a survey will tell you they don't want burning, they'd like to see it banned. And I might be wrong, but I believe that's going to be the case. However, if the council's going to take that information, move it to the next logical step, which would be to maybe work on an ordinance that does just that, it wouldn't be surprising that we don't fill this council up with people who are very much against any ban on burning, which puts us back to, okay, what did we learn from the survey and how useful was it? Because before you did the survey, there was harmony and order and everything was good in the world. So it's one of those things where that's always been a question we wanted answered, because I think everybody feels a certain way about that. But you never know how many people actually want to burn until you come up with this question and they show up at the council meeting. So, but that's a great example of how one could be used. The chicken thing is actually kind of interesting, because that's another thing that people either want them or they don't. And, I haven't really thought about chickens very much, but I'm not sure I'd want to live next door to a whole bunch of them, but
I've had multiple neighbors that have had them, and I've benefited from the chickens.
There you go.
I'm very glad that we have them.
Scott?
It seems to me, just listening, pretty pricey on some of them to get one answer. That's kind of where I'm looking at. Yeah, we're going to get none of them that are, one of them that was only statistically valid, kind of go along with what the mayor says. Is it true representation of the city of Merriam? And maybe that's a way to get them in the boardroom and find out that too. But what I'm getting at is, why do we spend $5,000 to get one answer? I think we could do that through Google Forms, which is free, correct? There's a SurveyMonkey, free. We can get that answer. Even if somebody has to take it off a Google sheet and say 27 people said yes, 28 said no, off a Google sheet. So again, to me, the money issue, I think, is what comes first thing to my mind. And because right now we struggling from administration staff, what question will we ask? Well, I mean, obviously we came up with one burning, but why are we going to spend $5,000 to do that? I have trouble with that. So that's my opinion.
I think as much as I respect Mr. Neal's opinion about this, because he has done the research on it, and I think his vision of where he would like it to go, and I don't mean to speak for him, he certainly can do that, but he has some fairly complex issues that he'd like to see answers from, and he doesn't see that that's likely to occur as efficiently with some of the lesser expensive software. However, when you look at the big picture, I don't know how many of those actual situations exist compared to just some of the more simple things we would survey. And then the other thing I would add was, as it's been stated here, which makes perfect sense, is we got to start somewhere to find out what our needs are. And if we start with a Cadillac and find out, well, we only really needed a Toyota, then we spend a lot of money on a Cadillac and we didn't need it. Where we can always trade up from the Toyota if we don't like it. Chris?
The only thing that is, we would need to know how much of a training issue it is. I mean, I know a lot of people already use SurveyMonkey for scheduling, right? We use that? Is that how we do that? Oh, we use Doodle polls here, don't we? Sorry, that's a different organization. So it's how much training whoever gets that short straw and gets to do this, how much training they
I
have.
think both Google Forms and SurveyMonkey are pretty intuitive, and it's pretty easy to create a form. I was able to go up and, usually Lauren does the Google polls and SurveyMonkey put togethers, and I was able to do it pretty quickly myself, so.
Good. So, yeah.
Here would be maybe a good synthesis or a good starting point from what I'm hearing from, I think, from the majority of the council. And if we're looking for a recommendation from staff, I'll just throw one out there. How about we start with the paid SurveyMonkey version, and we identify as questions arise that the council would like to know answers from. We will just find a way to present them in an unbiased manner and see what kind of information we get from that. And then we'll be able to come back with those answers and that feedback from the public and say, here's what we learned. We learned that either we think that this is valid, or we think we got a bunch of people that maybe were topic driven, and we'll try to dissect the data on our own, maybe with the help of SurveyMonkey, or maybe some of our colleagues in the other cities that look like they use this product. They might be able to help inform us of what's something that they see when they ask those type of questions. And then we can figure out, do we need to scale up from there versus scale down? Is that?
Councilmember Neal, I kind of wanted to make one more comment, and I think it's helpful, if that's all right.
Sure.
Yeah, I absolutely take what the mayor is saying and what everybody else is saying seriously. I think most of the time we don't have, super complex issues that we want to get information on, but when we do something really big, that's when you need potentially the more robust tool. But I certainly agree that SurveyMonkey the paid version would probably work just fine. We actually used, Councilmember Pape and I used SurveyMonkey when we queried the residents in West Vernon Place about some things. And the nice thing is that you actually know who responded if you send it out in an email, and so you have an idea of who's responding. And so I think that feature itself is important as opposed to some other possible ways of doing it. So I'm kind of in agreement that SurveyMonkey is probably the way to go for now. To try.
Very good. Jason, do you have a comment?
Well, I feel like we're kind of going around the table to give our opinions. So currently, if we use SurveyMonkey or the paid version or Google or any of these, it's more than what we currently have. So I would be okay with starting small, seeing if we get respondents, and then hopefully it will lead to more people responding, and then we can start looking for something that's a little more robust that could maybe dial down closer to more specific responses that we're looking for on bigger issues. So I'm happy with going with the paid version of SurveyMonkey to start off with.
Any other comments?
Would you like a motion?
I think this is
Mayor,
just direction,
just
isn't it?
direction.
So we're
Okay.
good. Have you gotten sufficient direction?
I'm okay with the paid SurveyMonkey.
Okay. All right, thank you, Jana.
Thank you.
Let's move to the next item, which is consider approval of governing body, wait, I'm sorry, I skipped one. Consider approval of an ordinance amending sections 1 through 3 and 2-29 of the Merriam Code of Ordinance. This is a first reading, so we're going to get to hear about it, but we won't be voting on it.
Mayor, we are recommending we waive the first reading.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's find out what it's about first.
Okay.
And we can decide whether we're going to waive it. How's that? This isn't Congress where you don't get to read it, you know.
And I am going to present from over here, if that's
Okay.
okay, since I'll
Right.
hopefully be taking a vote shortly. The item before you this evening is to consider approval of the ordinance amending Section 1.3 and 2-29 of the Merriam Code of Ordinances. This is related to the next item on the agenda, the governing body rules of procedure. So as staff was going through this document, we discovered many opportunities for improvement, and one of those that was discovered was the definition of governing body. It was defined a certain way in the governing body rules, but in the Code of Ordinances, the definition was slightly different. There is also a state statute that defines governing body. So that obviously was a problem, and we needed to get that cleaned up. A couple of other things that were discovered was minimal definition of when the mayor gets to vote, and what those kind of voting rights of the mayor are. And then another thing was our remote attendance by telephone or other means. COVID happened, we figured out how to hold these meetings remotely, and but we didn't really have that memorialized anywhere. So staff reached out to the city attorney to say, help clean this up for us, and so the ordinance before you is the result of that. So basically what the ordinance will do, will correctly define the governing body, which will include the mayor as a member of that governing body. It will outline the voting powers of the mayor, and then it also will memorialize the allowance for the remote meetings. And it was allowed by KAR 1620, but like I said, this will put it in our code. It'll memorialize it. So the statute, it defines the governing body, which includes the mayor, and the statute also allows for a city, through a regular ordinance, to define those voting powers of the mayor. The voting powers of the mayor are basically the same as they were before. It's just that this is going to clean it up and make it very concise and understandable. So what the voting power of the mayor will give is the mayor is allowed to vote on charter ordinances. We allow that now. That's not a change. The mayor is also allowed to vote in the result of a tie in motions or resolutions. So we do that right now as well. On regular ordinances, the mayor is allowed to vote when it is less than the favorable number. So as an example, regular ordinances, we have to have 5 affirmative votes of the governing body. So if we had a council member absent, like tonight, we could have 4 affirmative votes, 3 no votes, but we still don't have the 5 needed to pass the ordinance. So then the mayor would get a vote in that case. The other scenario would be on some zoning matters. A lot of times we have to have a 6 of 8 to vote on those, and then those would also be opportunities for the mayor to vote. In the past, on those zoning matters, we allowed the mayor to vote, even though maybe we didn't really need the vote. We just kind of let the mayor vote. So this is definitely going to clean it up. It's cleaner for staff so that we understand the scenarios. It's, cleaner for the council, and it is part of our city code. We are asking to waive the first reading because it is tied to the next item, which is the governing body rules. And we've memorialized this, information in that document as well, so that everybody's on the same page. All of it is in one document, and it's easy to understand and very clear. I am open for questions if you have any. We do have our city attorney, our substitute city attorney here. If you have any more technical questions, I may defer to him for that.
Well, I'd like to start off by saying how I think it's somewhat ironic that you're changing all these rules on when I get to vote, since this is my next to the last meeting.
Like I said, they're not really a change. It's still the same.
Sure. It seems like in most of these cases, we want to stay in congruence with state definitions. So I doubt that we have much to do other than to pass this unless someone else has a objection to it or a question. And this is, I guess, our first step is to recommend the waiving of the first reading.
Yes, so
So
we'll waive the first reading and then vote on the ordinance.
Get to that, and then we can talk about the ordinance. I need a motion to waive. Whitney?
Mr. Mayor, I move the council waive the customary first reading of an ordinance amending sections 1 through 3 and 2 through 29 of the Merriam Code of Ordinances.
And I'll second that.
Motion made and second. Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Hands.
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell.
Aye.
Councilmember Neal.
Aye.
Councilmember Pape.
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers.
Aye.
Councilmember Yodrich.
Aye.
Councilmember DeBold.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Very good. And the next step would be, unless there's further discussion about this, I'll entertain a motion in a second. Chris Hands?
Mr. Mayor, I move that the council approve an ordinance amending sections 1-3 and 2-29 of the Merriam Code of Ordinances.
Whitney?
I second.
Motion made and second. Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Caldwell.
Aye.
Councilmember Neal.
Aye.
Councilmember Pape.
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers.
Aye.
Councilmember Yodrich.
Aye.
Councilmember DeBold.
Aye.
Councilmember Hands.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Very good. Move to the next item, which consider approval of the governing body rules and the city council policies.
Okay, I'm going to do this one too.
Good.
So this item, it's kind of a two-part, so we'll start with the governing body rules of procedure first. The governing body rules of procedure is a comprehensive overview of the expectations and operations of the governing body and its members. The intent of the document will be used as a handbook or a training tool for governing body members. The process began in March of 2020 by staff, which was to just kind of update, make it modern, and just change the look of the document. Also, during that process, we went through and verified that all the state statute references were still current, excerpts from the city code to make sure those were current and updated because a lot of changes had occurred. And then also there was many things in there that we were doing in practice, but were not reflected in the governing body rules. So once that was completed, a council subcommittee was appointed of council members Pape, Hands, and Neal, and they met to go over the governing body rules from city council member eyes, and had several meetings, a lot of good feedback, a lot of things that they wanted updated, and so the result is a new and improved governing body rules for consideration tonight. So it's difficult to go over everything because there was a lot of stuff in there. I did highlight some of the major things, which would include our alternate meetings or ultimate methods for conducting meetings and receiving public comments. So we've memorialized that in code now, and it'll also be in the governing body rules. Another thing was we, for many years, have required seconds for our motions, and that motions die for a lack of a second. So that was our practice, but it was not memorialized in this document. Work sessions. We have a lot of work sessions, but there was nothing in the document that even talked about work sessions. So now that's been outlined, explained, so everybody understands what that is. And then voting power of the mayor. We've clarified that. Along with that, there's a lot of different scenarios for abstentions and how they count, and it was kind of confusing, so we hope that that is very clear now. And then the last thing would be the seating order of the council. So that will change. As you can see, it's odd. It's not in order. It was done many years ago when some of the council members were not as friendly toward one another, so that's why that was that way. And I can't tell you how many times I've answered the question from new staff members, council members, like, why is this weird? So it will not be weird any longer. It will be 1, 2, 3, and 4. So once we get, after the election, we swear in our new council members, your seating arrangement will change. So hopefully that isn't a problem for anyone. I can answer any questions, or we do have members of our council subcommittee here to answer any questions regarding the governing body rules.
You know, when I first became mayor, we had all females on this side and all males on this side, and I thought, well, that doesn't look right. So I came to someone and said, I think we need to make some changes, and I was quickly advised that that's actually set up by
The governing body
board,
rules, yeah.
and we couldn't change it, so that's kind of odd.
How far we've come that we
Yeah.
can sit in order again.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
Yes.
Any questions or comments?
Any questions on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Bob?
I'd just like to make a comment, Mayor, in reference to, I'd like to thank Mr. Engel and Ms. Pinnock and Ms. Hands and also Dave Neal for the assistance in going over, these governing body rules and regulations. How many years has it been, Julie, since we did these, the last time they were updated?
The last update was 2012,
2012, so,
many
it's
years.
almost 10 years ago that, so it was definitely in need of getting done. We did want to try to get this done under this existing council because you guys are all familiar with what we've been operating on for a number of years. We didn't think that'd be fair for the new council to come in and have to try to deal with that. Plus, it kind of gives them a guidebook to kind of learn what it is that they're supposed to be doing and how to do it. And so that's the importance of trying to get this done now instead of the new council taking it on. I would just make one additional comment in the sense that there are some areas that we're going to be doing some updates. We won't be 10 years again before we want to make changes to this existing document. There's a CID policy that hasn't been developed, but it's currently in the works that we're going to be we will be adding hopefully to this document. And then we want to tweak some of the things in the tax increment financing portion of the document that also needs to be changed and done. So even though we're adopting it, we will be coming back shortly in the near future anyway. That will be underneath the new council though at that point to look at those additional items that we'll be putting in to the governing body rules and regulations and procedures, council policies. So.
Okay. And I can go over the council policies if you want or not. So with the council policies, there were 30 individual policies. Most of them dated back to 1989. And going through those, there were a lot of policies that were really outdated. There was also policies that were very similar in nature. As an example, we had 3 different policies on the use of taxes and how we do that. So it just made sense to kind of combine those into one policy. And it just is more logical, I think. So that's kind of how we did it that way. There are several policies that will be repealed when we adopt the new ones. And I did list them on the action form. And I kind of put the dates on there so you could kind of understand like where these came from. So the first one on the list would be the street lighting policy. This is from circa 1989. We really don't need this policy anymore. We have a street light plan and installation plan, and that policy probably doesn't really even comply with like APWA standards because it's so old and outdated. The next one would be the policy 108. These are curb obstructions in the right-of-way. And what this was, when we were putting in new curbs and gutter, everybody had this nice curb and gutter, and a lot of people would put in like a blacktop wedge to make the transition smoother. We didn't allow those, but in speaking with the Public Works Director, he's like, people don't do this anymore. We don't really need something prohibiting it because it doesn't really happen. Policy 109 was, again, 1989, circa. It was employees handled by third parties. So we have an HR manager. She handles those things. It's not really something that the council probably needs to manage. Policy 110 was recognition of retirees. I think it said if you retire, you get $200 for a party. So,
All at once?
Yeah. It doesn't say if you don't have the party, do I just get the $200?
I didn't get $200
Yeah. That's for the parties. The other one, policy 112, is related to outstanding checks. This is regulated by state statute, plus I'm sure there's a financing GASB rule about outstanding checks. Consent agenda items and governing body expenses, we included those in the governing body rules, so we didn't have the need for that policy. And then the last one was the park naming policy from 1999. Staff was going to leave this in. When the subcommittee reviewed it, they said, this really probably belongs to the park board. So while we are repealing it as a council policy, it will then become a park board policy going forward. And that is all that I had on the city council policies. If you had any questions for me or the subcommittee members.
Any questions?
Councilmember Neal.
Go ahead, Mr. Neal.
Yeah, when we were looking at this, and I want to reiterate something that Bob said and how important it is. One of the things that we came up with, or came away with, is that we probably need some revisions in the TIF tax increment financing section, but it was decided, or at least based on feedback from my understanding from staff, that rather than the three of us tackle that directly, even though I certainly have some opinions, that we should possibly do a work session to kind of discuss some of these matters, as well as the possibility of policy for CID. So I want to be clear that the approval of this document still means that I believe there's still work to be done in those key areas. And so we're leaving the existing policy in place, but I strongly suggest that we take this up, or whoever the next council is, and look hard at that, and see if there's a lot of assumptions in there, a lot of sort of sentiment about how TIF ought to work. And I think that ought to be reviewed by the whole council, and hopefully that will happen. So.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments about this particular issue? Okay.
I just want to say they've done a lot, especially this woman over here has done a lot of work,
Yeah.
blood, sweat, and tears into this.
Very
and
good, very good.
Every iteration looks so much better than the one we've been dealing with for so many years. So, thank you.
And I'd like to thank Councilmember Hans, because she caught all the comma errors and semicolons and stuff as well. Appreciate that.
Very good. Well, then I guess I need a motion in a second. Mr. Pape.
Mayor, I would move the council approve the governing body rules of procedure and city council policies as presented, repealing city council policies 104, 107 through 110, 112, 122, and 123.
Ms. Hans.
And I would like to second that.
Motion made and second. Madam Clerk.
Councilmember Neal.
Aye.
Councilmember Pape.
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers.
Aye.
Councilmember Yodridge. Aye. Councilmember DeBold.
Aye.
Councilmember Hands.
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Very good. Item number 4 is consider approval of an ordinance relating to food trucks. First reading. Mr. Dyer, how are you?
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Brian Dyer, Community Development Director. This evening, we're having a first reading of food truck vendor regulations. Currently, the City of Merriam ordinances do not include any types of regulations specifically for food trucks. In fact, some of the zoning regulations actually could be interpreted as to discourage food trucks throughout the City of Merriam. However, I think we're all aware that food trucks are an important part of a number of our city activities that we sponsor, as well as we especially pre-pandemic, got a lot of requests from food truck vendors of what the rules and regulations to operate in the city were. So with that in mind, community development as well as the city's clerk's office worked together to come up with some draft regulations for you all to consider. The first thing we obviously did is look at all our neighbors and what they did. I apologize, didn't get this included in your packet. That's why it perhaps looks a little
a little rudimentary, and did have a request today from a council member for this, so I'm going to share it with you this evening. Also, but we'll put it out, also send it to everybody out by email so you can take a closer look at it as well. I think the one thing to note is that if you look at our neighbors, Overland Park, Lenexa, Shawnee emissions, they're very similar in the types of regulations they have. And obviously that's where that was really our starting point, is to look to how to craft these regulations. We also had some goals for these regulations. Wanted to be very straightforward, wanted to be easy to understand, wanted to be uncomplicated. Wanted to be also serve our residents as well as vendors who want to do food trucks in the city of Merriam, but also recognize that we have restaurants that are bricks and mortar restaurants that sometimes food trucks really are can put these folks to a little bit of a competitive disadvantage. Obviously, bricks and mortar restaurants have a much higher fixed costs they have to deal with versus a food truck that just doesn't have to pay property tax and have a upkeepability and things like that. So those are the goals we wanted to achieve and to do with these regulations. I think we have done that. I'm going to kind of briefly go over some of the high points of these regulations. Obviously, be happy to answer any questions that the council may have. But the first thing is, food trucks will be required to have a Merriam occupational license or an MOL to operate within the city. This really isn't new. Folks that operate a business in the city should be getting an MOL. However, again, as I mentioned earlier, we really don't have any regulations or standards for food trucks, so it was obviously difficult to issue somebody an MOL when we really didn't have a standard for what we were issuing them for. So, so we just wanted to reiterate and make clear that you do need an MOL. Probably really one of the key parts to this whole regulations is with that MOL, to get an MOL, you'll need to provide the city with proof that you have a valid Kansas food establishment license and have a fire department inspection. I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on the inspection part of it. There is a group called the Heart of America Metro Fire Chiefs Council. That's obviously the group of the Metro Fire Chiefs within here, and they've set standards for these types of food trucks. So the fire departments that do these inspections have standards by which they go by to inspect fire trucks. To inspect these food trucks. Obviously, the inspection is related to the safety of the trucks. And so pretty much I believe any of the Metro fire departments can do that inspection. Obviously, Overland Park, who provides our fire service, can do it. And when they do the inspection, they provide the vendor with a proof that they passed the inspection. I believe it's a sticker that they get. So that's what we would also require, a picture or something from the vendor when they do their Merriam occupational license. Food trucks cannot operate in the city street unless they're part of a city-approved event. And you're going to, that city-approved event is something that is all throughout the code through these suggested regulations. I'm going to read the definition of a city-approved event and elaborate a little bit more about that. A city-approved event means any event organized and operated by the city, including but not limited to city-approved neighborhood block parties in which a portion of the public right-of-way or private street is blocked off. This is something I believe a lot of our neighbors also deal with. Obviously, we have some very unique events, and we want to make sure that we make them available to our to the food trucks, because it's something I think that a lot of the folks attending these events are very interested in, is those food trucks. So again, as you see this that city-approved event permeates throughout these regulations. It's recognizing that we have some unique things in which we need to allow the food vendors to operate in. So again, just also on that other part of that is they cannot operate in the city streets. So obviously they cannot operate in the city right away. Reason for that is for life safety purposes again. Again, having a food truck pull up in the middle of Shawnee Mission Parkway, start vending it would be a very, very dangerous situation. So that's the purpose behind that. Next one is can't block a city street, a pedestrian access way, or a bicycle path. Food trucks, the next one, food trucks can only operate on private property that is zoned commercial or industrial unless they're part of a city-approved event. Again, I think attended city events, been next to those food trucks, they're loud. They got generators going, they got they got oven hoods going, got a lot of people making a lot of noise. They're a pretty intense use. So these are commercial type uses that fit well within commercially zoned areas. So and just to make sure we're clear, commercial zoning is our I, our C zoning, as well as our planning and development general zoning. So if someone wants to do a food truck event, say at Merriam Town Center, in the parking lot, that zone PUDG, it's on private property. Also, the ordinance does say you have to have approval of the property owner, so they would be able to do an event in that location. And then the other thing I want to make note of that is the city improved events, as I mentioned earlier, does include block parties. So if you were doing a block party, so you come through the city, you come to the city clerk, get the proper approval to hold a block party, block off the right of way and things like that, you could have a food truck there. The philosophy, the thought process behind that is obviously if it's a block party, much larger area, a whole lot different than a food truck rolling up to you directly as your neighbor, firing up the generators and stuff. So it covers a much larger area. Also, the idea is that a neighborhood party, all the residents have noticed an idea that that's going to be going on. So, so we feel that it would be appropriate to, if the neighborhood wanted to have a block party, to have a food truck, to have the ability to have a food truck there. Food trucks can only operate on a hard surface. Food trucks cannot operate within 150 feet of a brick and mortar restaurant unless they have permission from the restaurant. That is, again, recognizing that we have bricks and mortar restaurants. Just don't want to have a food truck necessarily roll up right out the front door of them and put our brick and mortar restaurant at a competitive disadvantage. So that's the objective behind that bullet point. Food trucks can only serve alcohol as long as they have the state and city required licenses for that. And then the last thing is the city administrator can waive any and all of the regulations for a unique or special event. Again, recognizing that our regulations, while we try to craft them to cover a lot of different scenarios and a lot of different situations, there likely is going to be some point in time that the city's going to have some unique event that we want these food trucks at, and we want the city administrator to have the ability to approve that. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Again, this is simply the first reading.
Bob?
One of my question is concerning at the block parties, a lot of times the ones that I've attended, they have gotten Public Works to come out and barricade that off. Mm-hmm. Would that truck be able to park in the street at that time instead of having to park in somebody's driveway?
Yes, it would. Yes, okay. And that's exactly the intent of that, is exactly that.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Whitney?
Is it required that the block parties use the grant form?
It is not.
It is not. They just need to let the city know we're having a block party.
There's actually a procedure to go through the city clerk to get approval for a block party. And really kind of the big part of that is police notification and fire notification. And then also, as Councilmember Paper mentioned, also if they want to block off the street to have Public Works set up to barricades to block off the street.
Okay, great.
Anybody else? Jason?
I have a request that's somewhat outside the realm of this current discussion, but it has to do with this new ordinance. So in section 9, where we're talking about trash and recycling, I have a request that maybe we adjust the term handicap accessible. I think that's a term that down the road is going to be eliminated and replaced with something different. So my request is maybe to put accessibility points, just the word accessible or accessibility. But I know it's probably throughout our codes, and it's gonna ultimately down the road cause city staff more work. But I do see this as being a term that down the road is not going to be acceptable, and because this is a new ordinance, I am just requesting that maybe we approach this one by changing that now.
Sure, there's a couple things on that.
And I'm sorry, I do know that it's probably perfectly acceptable and legal at this time to use it as a city. I think that it's something that's going to change down the road, and I want to get ahead of it.
Yeah, and first of all, certainly can do that if the council wants to do that. Obviously, there's a lot that goes along with that phrase, not just here, throughout the MUTCD, the APWA standards, all that stuff. But if there's a desire to take it out now, certainly I think wouldn't be a problem. The other point I would make is that these are your ordinances, so at any point in time, you all can change them. So if there is a change in the verbiage and the language that's used for this, council at any point in time can change that. So I always want to make sure the councils understand that it seems like these things are written in stone, but they certainly aren't. They're your ordinances, and you can certainly change them at any point in time. But if there's a desire to take it out, just simply make it accessible routes. I don't think that would be difficult. I don't think that would be a problem if the council would so desire.
That'd be my preference. I'm not sure if the rest of the council agrees, but.
I agree with that. I think that'd be a good move.
Yeah, I would ask the attorney to give us feedback about what the language may end up being. I don't know.
I'd say there's nothing at this current juncture that would prevent using that word, but the speculation on that moving forward is not off base, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
As I understand it, you're wanting to change it from handicap accessible to just accessible?
Yes.
Does that make it a little bit vague in terms of a common person saying accessible for who and why and when and under what circumstances? That's my only concern. They said,
And
"We're gonna
is
make it
handicap accessible, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just have a question also, is handicap accessible such a word that's common in the vernacular that when it's defined to the general public or the normal, the person that would read this, that to change it perhaps does change the meaning of it, or the meaning gets lost if we don't have something that references what.
Well, so in my research, what I found is that the general consensus is that the term is a little bit too, what's the right term? It's not a favorable term necessarily moving forward. The word handicap.
Sure.
We're trying to be a little bit more sensitive. And then when you look at handicap accessible, like the meaning of it, it actually means handicap is a barrier and accessible is a non-barrier. So it's actually a term that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I know that people are used to that term, but we've used terms throughout history that as time goes on, we realize isn't the best term, and society has to come along with the change that is made. And so I think at any point, someone's going to have to learn how to use a different.
Right. And certainly understand that, and as Mr. Engel did mention, it is, when you say that term, everybody's going to know exactly what you mean. Don't block the ramp. Right. If you take that out, accessible is very vague as to what we're talking about.
And that's why one of my suggestions was maybe accessibility points.
And I would say that probably is, again, not going to convey to somebody exactly what the point is. And as I mentioned earlier, when the time comes where there is a different verbiage to be used for that, and I don't disagree that time will come. As I mentioned, the council can certainly, I would actually hazard to speculate that when that time comes, council will probably direct staff, if staff doesn't do it already, just to do a comprehensive search through all our ordinances to make a holistic change to that, much like we have been doing, with the pronouns.
And I'd be okay with just flagging this and keeping an eye on how the terminology changes.
Yeah, actually, I think it'd be very interesting to find something that does replace it, because for the reasons that you stated, I just don't want to lose the clarity in the process. And it may be that we just haven't evolved to that point yet, and that we will. I mean, we've been down that road on a number of other phrases that we used to use that are no longer accessible. Sometimes it's more of an evolution to get to that point so everybody understands what we're talking about. So I think probably be wise to leave it as is, but be open to the change, because I certainly would love to see where that goes. Mr. Caldwell?
Isn't all this discussion around ADA compliance?
Yes.
So Couldn't we stay that?
ADA compliant.
Yeah, it's an ADA compliant route.
Well, you'd have to use Americans with Disabilities Act
Disabilities Act.
compliant. So then you're back
Lots
to
of words.
disabilities.
You know,
which
it
is
is what it
kind-
is.
Yeah.
It's the law.
I think that the issue, though, is some people that are in that category tend to find that the term lessens them to a certain extent, which is what we're trying to avoid. I think the problem is we just really haven't found a good replacement yet. Does that make sense? Yeah. But that's exactly what it means. We're trying to soften it up, be nice, so everybody doesn't feel bad about it, but we got to still be specific enough that people understand
So there's clarity.
that this is what it means.
Well, I thank everyone for letting me derail this for a moment.
Sure, anyway, it's a good conversation regardless.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
so I thought you were going to ask this question, but I'm going to, since you're not. So if I have my big blowout, 100th birthday party, and I'm going to invite a whole bunch of people on my acre lot, I need to apply to the city so I can have the food truck come? Is that true?
You would need a block party, you'd need to set up a neighborhood party application, that would be correct, yes.
Really? Okay.
what if it wasn't a party, it was a family thing? Still the same?
Yeah, still the same, yeah, and again, this is a commercial use, so.
Okay, well, then I have another question. So how do we zone churches?
Churches are typically R1.
Okay, and I know in my Prairie Village church, we've had food trucks a couple of times in the parking lot. How does that work with us?
Again, they would most likely need to do a block party establishment. That's a block party if it's in a residentially zoned area. Some churches, I can't think offhand if we have some churches that aren't R1, but it would be, again, need to do a block party for it.
Because they have nice parking lots, but, okay, thank you.
Well, that just prompted another question for me.
Way to go, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. Can a church apply for our block party grant of $200 to put on
I
a?
will look at our city clerk to see.
Did you say the block party grant?
No, not the
Well,
grant.
not-
Oh, did you say the grant?
Yeah,
or
for
block
the
party?
$200 so that they can have up to buy
If the,
food.
yeah, the block party grant or the block party permit?
No, I'm looking for the grant. I'm looking for money.
Yeah.
Oh, the grant? I'd have to go back and look and see.
Yeah.
I do believe one of the parts about the block party grant is you have to invite, the grant is you have to make it open to all your neighbors. So you have to invite everybody in the neighborhood.
we would
I'll
definitely do
actually
that.
go back and I can look and see. I don't remember offhand.
So, back to the churches. We have churches that will rent blow-up toys and all these other type of commercial type things that come on grounds into the parking lot. Would they need a block party grant?
If they are simply renting, if they're having a function I would not say that's commercial activity because they're not charging any fees or any entrance fees or anything like that. That's simply them putting on an event for folks. So it's not a commercial activity. There's no money being exchanged hands to go slide down a slide.
I think the distinguishing feature in this case is you actually have a commercial entity, a business coming on there that has to be regulated for nothing else but for health reasons. That's what really distinguishes this as different than everything else. Although I do find it a little bit odd that some of these huge churches probably do have food trucks all the time, and I doubt that they do any of the things that you just described. We don't have any churches like that in Merriam, so it probably doesn't apply to us, but I mean, it begs the question, and certainly I can see that happening without anybody knowing about it. Plus, this food truck thing, I think we all recognize that this kind of stuff goes on the weekends where a lot of times they might just pull up and open up for business, and you guys aren't around.
And that's another thing in talking with the police chief is exactly that. Just want to make sure they're pretty straightforward and easy for everybody to understand is exactly on the enforcement side of things.
Because we had one up here at the Taco Bell, the old Taco Bell, that showed up and was up there for weeks.
And they did come through the process, and they were kind of the test of exactly how we wanted to handle the food trucks.
They sold, was it
funnel cakes, I believe.
Funnel cakes, yeah, so, and that's all they sold, and they kind of showed up one day and operated, and I checked into it and found out they did have the permits.
Yeah, we worked with them, and again, we used that really kind of as a test subject to see exactly how to regulate and work with work with a vendor like that.
This is Councilmember Neal. I thought I'd like to toss out a couple of thoughts that have been come up from the discussion. It would seem to me that, and I don't know if we can do this, but I got to thinking about church events. Churches are communities in their own right, in a sense, and I guess I don't really have a problem with the church holding an event on their property, which included some sort of food, or for example, popsicle truck or something like that. And I just want to make sure, I don't know, I guess I have a little bit of a problem with trying to say that that's not permissible. I know you kind of made the distinction about commercial, but the food truck, or, again, I don't know how a popsicle truck would fit into this definition, so that's kind of my question. But, the vendor itself would have to have the, occupational license with the city. I get that, that's fine, but so my question is, are we essentially with this ordinance now prohibiting something that, because we didn't have an ordinance before, that, would have been permissible? And, I wonder if we could look at how to change this ordinance to possibly allow churches to have some events where they're able to use those types of vendors.
First of all, the first part of the question, this is actually opening things up. Right now, we are very restrictive on our food vendor regulations, so this is actually opening them up and making them less restrictive. So this is an improvement from, if you're a food truck vendor, this is an improvement from that perspective of it. In regards to allowances for churches, again, most of our churches are located in residential areas, and these food trucks aren't quiet. So there is a potential for them to be considered to be a nuisance. But if it is something that, and I guess the other thing I would always mention is, as I mentioned earlier, you all can always change your regulations. So if there's a desire to open it up to more folks and more opportunities, you certainly can do that. And we're trying to make these straightforward and easy for everybody to understand.
Whitney?
Okay, so if the food truck, I say I want it to come to a party, a private party on a residential zone. If they're not selling anything, but just providing like catering essentially that I've paid for out of my own pocket, do they still need to? I'm just trying to figure out where the line is, right? Because I'm thinking like, someone's going to want to have a party and they'll invite a food truck and then it'll be shades of gray. You know what I mean?
If they're a food truck, they would still need their MOL license, and they would still need to get, again, really want to make sure that the food trucks operating in the city of Merriam are safe.
Right.
And and they meet the regulations for that, so they would still need an MOL.
So when Chris has her party and we're all invited to her 100th birthday party, it's going to be a rager. Minimum, it would be best to use the block party notification application for something like that, just in case. So it is a city-approved event. You don't run into any issues.
Correct.
Also, this is first reading, so if we
And also, sorry.
want to think about it and bring some more questions back, or if we want to ask for more information, this would be a good time to do that.
It also seems like the last bullet that says the city administrator can waive any or all is our go-to way to get a
Correct.
blessing.
Correct. And just, most of the food truck requests the city would get, city staff get, are for commercial areas. We don't, I am unaware of us getting any questions of anybody wanting to do a food truck at a private event in a residential area. They are, I would say, all have been requests for typically a parking lot. So,
Well, and the request for a block party grant or block party permit would keep Chris from having it every weekend.
I'm not going to turn 100.
Well, why don't we close at that and call this the first reading? If you have questions, comments, concerns, you can certainly email City Administrator Brian Dyer directly. If you have something you would like to discuss it further, we certainly have another opportunity in 2 weeks. Thank you for your presentation. CIP update. Jim, how are you? Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Thank you. Okay, this evening I have your CIP update for the 2021 Street Improvement Program. The contractor has finished hydro seeding the mill and overlay project on Friday. That project is now completed. This is kind of an update to the update. The sidewalk maintenance along 61st Street, 60th Terrace, Knox, and 60th Street, hydro seeding has not been completed, and their plans are to complete that this week. The CarMax East Frontage Road Cars project is substantially complete. Sod restoration has already taken place. On the majority of the project, we have a few areas of sod that they are going to have to remove and replace, and they have not completed the area that would be south of 74th Street, the hospital entrance, and their plans are to complete that this week. The West Vernon Place preliminary engineering study, BHC Engineering provided staff with a draft report on the existing conditions, evaluations, along with an estimated construction cost for several options. BHC will be providing us with a completed draft later this week that will include their recommendations along with the engineering conclusions. And the final one I have is the miscellaneous storm pipe lining improvements that we have throughout the city. Council approved that contract last meeting. Our contractor returned the signed documents on Friday, and we're working on a schedule for a pre-construction meeting along with a notice to proceed. That project is estimated to take about 60 days once we give them the notice to proceed. I'm happy to answer any questions on these projects or anything Public Works related.
Jason?
I just wanted to invite council and then all the people watching this on YouTube to go check out the new LED street light at the corner of 49th and Knox, because it is the difference between night and day. It's amazing how much light is coming out of that, but focused light, and it's really impressive. So I think your team and city staff who researched this did a great job.
That was one of those lights that we had the ballast that went out. It was a high-pressure sodium, and we just replaced that single light, so you can really tell a large difference.
Wow.
So.
Where is it again? 40?
It's at the corner of 49th and Knox.
Okay. Yep. Know it well. Bob?
Could you just mention, Jim, about the large item pickup that you guys are going to be doing coming up in October?
Yes, third week of October is our large item pickup. I do not have a calendar in front of me.
18th?
18th through the 22nd, thank you. And again, same areas as we typically start. We'll start at 75th Street and work our way ahead. But each neighborhood has its own day. So we'll have those items to be picked up. There's usually a list of items that Jenna puts on the highlights that we cannot take.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Engel, do you have any staff items this evening?
Yeah, Mayor, I just have two. First, I want to apologize for missing the last meeting and thank Jennifer for, wherever she's at, thank Jennifer for, thank on behalf of the council for apparently the quick meeting, the 25-minute meeting that occurred in my absence.
We actually wanted to go longer, but she wouldn't let us have it.
It was 28. It was spectacular.
Fantastic. I'm sorry that I missed it, but I was ill, but I do apologize. Next one, I want to thank Jenna and her team of volunteers, some of whom are on the council and some of our staff members that are here, for a very successful e-recycle, bike recycle, paper shredding event, paint recycling event that was at Nations Holdings, 67th and I-35 this weekend. It was very, very busy, and so very, very well received from both what we assume to be all Shawnee and Merriam residents. Clearly a service that's well needed and appreciated by the residents of both those cities. So I do want to thank Jenna for coordinating that with her team of volunteers, because it was clearly a long time overdue. So that's all I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
More questions? We have an executive session this evening. What's the time?
Let's do 15 minutes, because it's going to take a couple minutes to get Councilmember Neal on the phone.
Okay. So this will be a 15-minute executive session for those two of you who aren't city staff that are in the audience. We'll be leaving the council chambers, and we'll be returning at the time given. Mr. Pape, did you want to make that motion?
Yes, Mayor. I'd move the council recess into executive session for consultation with the city attorney to discuss a potential development project as justified by KSA 75-4319B2, which allows the city council to recess into executive session for consultation with legal counsel, which would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship. Present would be the governing body, city attorney, city administrator, and community development director. The meeting will reconvene in the council chambers at 9 p.m.
And I'll second that.
Motion made and second. Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Pape,
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers,
Aye.
Councilmember Yodrich,
Aye.
Councilmember DeBolt,
Aye.
Councilmember Hands,
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell,
Aye.
Councilmember Neal. Motion passes 7-0.
Okay, the meeting's back in order, or I guess in process, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I so move.
And motion made.
Second.
And seconded, Madam Clerk.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned.